All right, what do we got here?
Hi, this is a old timer's workbench. Actually, it's my workbench that came out of the old shop, and it's how we did stuff in the, in fact, early '60s. But the guy I worked for was a mechanic before World War II, and this toolbox right here, as a matter of fact, is his toolbox. It's pre-war, and it's the toolbox he took to Bath Iron Works every day during World War II.
What was his name?
His name was Irvin Pinkham, and he's the guy I bought out in 1974, end of '74. This right here is a ratchet, either direction, half-inch drive from that era. Pre-war, would you say, Matt?
Easily.
Yeah. Kind of a cool rig, and here's some, there's some other ratchets from that same era right here. This one, I don't know what the deal was, but looks like somebody had it. I don't know, but anyhow, that's...
Used it for a hammer.
Yeah, well, a lot of that stuff got used for hammers. And then you had this kind right here, which had a, instead of having a female socket, had a male socket, and you drove it with a lot of the sockets had tops on them. I had some kicking around here, but I don't see them right off the top of my head. Yeah, there's one.
Well, it's still-
Different drive, but
yeah,
the
they
same
still
idea.
have that type wrench.
Do they really?
Oh, yeah.
Really? Okay. So, prior to about 1980, when India and Japan started making reasonably decent tools, and I'd say, would you agree with me there? Prior to 1980, you spent, for a drill index, you'd spend $250 for a half-inch down to an eighth or a 16th by 64ths. 250 was not out of line.
No?
And a socket set, half-inch drive socket set would run you a couple $100. And so most of us that worked in this business had crappy stuff like something like this right here was a really cheapo set made in the USA, but it's got an Allen drive on it.
Isn't that what goes in that half-inch ratchet?
Okay, that would also, yeah, that would be an adapter, maybe.
Oh, okay.
Who knows? I don't know, but the stuff was not great. And if you had something like this, you were a real pro mechanic. I mean, this would not have been cheap. This is a snap-on. It's a snap-on ratchet, and you had a lot of money to do that. What most of us dealt with were stupid stuff like this that was left over from God knows what, some World War, some tool that came. We had these kind of wrenches. Nice, they'd slip off the nut very quickly and round because you never knew what the hardening was on the bolts and stuff.
So these are knuckle busters.
Same thing right there. For looking up little tubes and stuff like that, you had crappy little lights like this one. You had it working once. I probably left it on. But they were like this, little light bulbs at the end. You might use
You
something.
pay for those. They don't give those.
Oh,
away
no,
at
no,
Harbor
you,
Freight.
no. Then no. You pay for something like that. And we all smoked. The top of the bench was always look like that. Have a lit cigarette going in the
Oh, it'd be
groove.
smoldering for sure.
And
Yeah.
it usually had a fire right in there with all the cigarette butts burning up, and there'd always be a crushed pack or two of cigarettes. And the torches we used were gas. A lot of us used gas torches like this. Propane was a fairly new innovation.
Gas like gasoline?
That and
Yes.
kerosene.
Yes.
This
You
torch
use-
uses gasoline?
Yeah, it uses white gas.
Wow.
And you fill up this little tray down below, and you
Preheat.
light it, and it preheats it, and then finally, and they pressurize the hell out of it with this plunger right here.
Would you do all this right next to your ashtray?
Well, of course you would.
Wow.
Why not?
All right.
What the hell?
That's not OSHA
There was
approved.
no OSHA stuff. And OSHA was long, long in the future. And our main tools were this, hammer and a chisel. That's how you started. Nuts, you use those wrenches right there after you got the nuts started. And you'd use prick punches, and then you'd use chisels of different sizes. And if you were lucky, the guy I worked for, this would have been a pair of his pliers that you would have had. You could see how easy they would have cut wire. There's nothing left of the groove, always shacked and bent. And then you had Ford wrenches like this, and those would work on a real big nut maybe. But again, they had used as a hammer so much that they would be wide or they wouldn't work well. Or
Well, they use that to drive another one of these on.
Exactly. Oh, there we go. Absolutely, without question. So the stuff you worked with was really crappy, and a hammer and chisel was one of your best tools. The guy I worked for, his screwdrivers looked, if you were lucky, they looked like this. Most of the time, they looked more like I don't even know if I've got one that's that bad. They looked like this with a piece missing out of it and bent, and they never worked. And of course, again, you're back to the chisel. God, these are all pretty good. They came out of that tool place up in Liberty. I didn't look at the ends. There's a good end right there. That's a typical screwdriver
It's
end.
got a
of what we
special
started.
curve in it.
Right. And a lot of times this part
blind
would be
spots.
driven right up through the handle, and you could actually hit the screwdriver. The handle would be all the way down to here, and the end of this would be sticking up through the wood.
I think I had the short screwdriver to this one.
And a lot of times they'd fix the handle with friction tape. They didn't have that elastic stuff.
No, that was that tar-based
Right.
asbestos
Right.
fabric.
Right. So anyhow, and then electric drills like this, if you had one of these, you were doing stuff. And this is from that era. This thing right here probably would have run you, I'd say 50, 60, 70 bucks.
Oh, back in the day, yeah.
Yeah. And that was in their dollars, not in today's dollars. I'm not expanding this stuff. $250 for a drill index is what you paid back then in the 50s and 60s, and probably even more in the 30s.
Well, it took special machining, so it's gonna carry a heavier price.
And then your gasket goo came in a little bottle, some of them like this, and it was always dry and hard as a rock. And valve grinding comment, you're probably pretty familiar with that. That would have been an automotive store. This
It
is
had two grades. You had
has two
fine and
grades.
coarse.
top here. It's fine, and then this is coarse if you can read it.
Oh, there's two grades in one can?
Two cans in
Yeah.
one can, right?
Yeah. Is there something in the center that separates it, or they just put a cloth
Yeah,
in?
no, it's separated in the center.
Wow.
And then scientifically manufactured grease. Okay, this is the kind of stuff I was talking about for driving bearings out.
Yeah, the
It would have been what they call, I think, axle grease. Did they call it that?
Shell was making this stuff that was called Marfac.
Okay, I've run into
And
that.
it's brown and sticky, very similar to that.
So that would have what you'd use to drive out those roller
And
bearings.
then when you were done, you put it back in the can, because that stuff
course.
was expensive.
Exactly. Close enough for government work.
Right.
And I pretty much the tool, the ultimate tool in the outboard industry, if you can move just a little bit, man. The tool that when I went to work for Irvin Pinkham, it was sitting on a bench just like this. Perhaps some of this was the Champion spark plug service tool, and around it was a mound of probably 300 or 400 spark plugs, because you could pull your abrasive blaster, you'd stick the plug in there, and you could
Sandblast
clean the
the end.
sandblast you could sandblast the end of it and save it and reuse the
Well,
spark
what
plug.
it was is they went that route because they found out if you put a spark plug on a wire wheel, the steel from the wire would embed itself into that porcelain, and it would short the plug out prematurely. It'd never even make it to the electrode where it's supposed to go.
And then you could test it right here. This was a spark checker, and you could run up your well, I guess this is when you set the arrow to the plug gap, whatever that was, right here. Let's say it's 25 thousandths. And then you would run, it would tell you when the pressure got up to 120, you had your spark plug in here, and you had this attached to the top. And I forget what you used to
You could watch it jump right
jump
here.
right in the air, okay, in that hole. But what button did you, there's the button right there. You press that button, and the spark gap would
And I think
jump.
this right here adjusts your pressure.
Right.
That's your regulator.
So that's how you told whether the spark
Oh, I've
plugs are
seen
good.
it. I've used one of these.
Well, I did too. I used them all the time when I worked for them. But when the gasoline changed, it just was, no, these things were totally, well, even by that
Oh, the
time, they were
ignition
going
systems and
anyhow.
everything had changed,
Right.
you know?
But that was the tool, that was it, that was the tool.
And back in the day, what I recall, and I can think back as far as the British stuff, of course, they had their British standard.
Oh, God. Yeah, you worked on
Well,
this.
the Americans also did it the same way, except they used it different sized nuts. You had your 11/32, 9/32,
Yes.
and they went the whole gambit of the fractional system.
Yep.
So these wrenches weren't just 1/2 inch, 9/16 or anything like
No,
that.
they're a
Oh
lot
no, it
more.
was everything in between.
Yes. And you had, we still see it today with point wrenches for doing ignition systems. I think they still sell those, don't they?
What's that?
Ignition wrenches?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, those have got the thing he's talking about by 30 seconds or 64ths or whatever.
Oh my
I mean,
God, yeah.
There's a zillion little wrenches, you can barely even tell
Well,
what the size
what
is.
really set me off was the fact they had the audacity to make these wrenches, and you'd have an open end on one end and a boxed end on the other. They were opposite sizes, so when you need a 1/4 inch open end wrench, you take that 1/4 inch. They look, you've got an open end wrench. You look at it going, that's not 1/4 inch, but the boxed end is. What is up with that? I mean, they used to pull stuff like that, so you'd have to buy the whole set.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that was salesman. I think that was a salesman tactic.
I was just happy to find
Let's
it.
push it. You'll have to buy a whole bag of these things.
And let's see, is there nothing underneath here we need to look at? This is basically parts and pieces to Mercury outboards that are underneath here. And
As they would have been in
the
the day.
manuals right here, they were kind of messy. Some guys would have used the service guide, like sitting over in that box over there, that gives you some of the point gaps and things like that. But generally, if you were doing something, you'd do. And this right here, this is a battery tester. And maybe you could tell me a little bit about it. Sterling 6-volt battery tester. That would have been the very earliest electric start outboards used that.
This will go on the
6-volt.
positive, and this will go on the negative. Those are two
And you'd
contacts.
fire it up and run it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And it would tell you, what exactly is that, an ammeter? Or a voltmeter?
It's a voltmeter.
Is it a voltmeter?
Yeah.
Huh.
Battery tester. Start charging. Okay. So it has its own preset to what charging system's output is.
All right. And this thing right
That looks-
here,
That looks pretty scary, though.
this right here is a ring expander. All right, same thing we looked at, the Mercury thing, this thing is supposed to stop it. That's how you'd have your ring sitting out here, like that.
What that did was that set it for you. You take a new ring or your old ring, put it on there and set it, and then you could slip it down over. You wouldn't have to worry about
Right.
holding it open. Yeah.
Right, exactly, right. And this was a ratchet, so you
Yeah.
could adjust it, and have it slip on you and
Either that or accidentally break
That
the
looks
ring
like
any
one of
damn
those
way.
crappy tools you'd end up throwing against the wall before you were done. Yeah. And oh, yeah, right. If you were lucky enough to have one of these drills for maybe even $100 back in those days, most of us had this honey.
The hurdy-gurdy.
And my guy that I worked for, Irvin Pinkham, that's what you used. And he had a son-in-law that could sharpen drill bits. So every drill bit you always had was always, you would always have to drill to the size of the sharpest drill bits.
And we call them hurdy-gurdies.
You use this
because-
to your shoulder.
Yeah, we call them hurdy-gurdies because if you were using a really dull drill bit, you were just, you're instantaneously thinking you gotta push down on it harder. Well, the drill bit would break and you'd go flying against whatever it is that you're drilling and chances are you'd get hurt. A hurdy-gurdy.
Yes, hurdy-gurdy. I see hurdy-gurdy. right.
Hurdy-gurdy. Hurdy-gurdy.
And back in the 50s and 60s, they wore uniforms. This is a uniform jacket right here from my company from back in actually from the 80s, I would say. But that was about the last of the people coming and having their uniforms. I think they still do it in some automotive shops, don't they?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you have.
But the outboard industry, they pretty much stopped.
In the old literature, they have got outboard mechanics wearing a hat and a tie and a
Yes.
jacket.
Oh, that was the on-staff salesman they had at the shop. No, sir, that's not really what you need. Look, right in the calendar, right in the catalog, this is what we got for you. Oh, yeah, this
Well,
is
I think he's talking the 20s and 30s. They actually did wear coat ties. It was a highly, but the thing to remember is that was also a time when a mechanic was highly respected.
Boy,
Highly
times have
respected.
changed.
Yeah, they sure have changed. Well, that's about it. I can't think of anything else. How did you like the artwork?
What
This
about
was
yeah, we haven't mentioned that.
very politically incorrect. Every mechanic always had pinups over his bench. And the shop itself would be plastered with them everywhere.
Oh,
And
yeah,
this is a pretty good example right in here of most of the stuff that would be up.
yeah, I can remember we had this was when I was in Pennsylvania. And a young lady came in and needed to use the facilities. And on the back of the door in the bathroom was this, I think it was a Playboy calendar, but it was a big one. They had some very, very pretty young lady who wasn't dressed at all, and I'm not talking scantily clad dress. We're talking birthday suit. Well, that lady went in there, switched the light on, sat down and saw that thing, and you could hear her screaming.
How about this one? This is a birthday suit one right here. She's turned a little bit colored from the covering it had, but that would have been a birthday suit special.
Are you gonna edit this?
No, not that kind of stuff. This is for men. Our readership has one or two women and
Oh, that was when they had hair on them then.
that's right. I think that one does.
It still has the hair on it.
Good thing I'm not involved in this video.
Yeah, come to think of it, it seems to me that David Kelly has been the one, our president has supplied a lot of these little pictures.
I had to get him out of my house.
Yeah.
Well, in my shop, it's been known that David would disappear in my shop and wind up out in the other end of it.
He went up the stairs.
Where all my wall art is. And my shop is not politically correct by any means.
No.
So Lincoln, this is your workbench from your other shop in
Yeah,
downtown
Pretty
Waldoboro.
much all the pieces came out of the old workbench.
And
Some-
if anybody has seen Peter Hunn's Antique Outboard Handbook,
Which one was it, the fourth? Was that the fourth edition?
maybe
Where he's
we,
got his shop?
maybe we have a copy
Well,
here.
I
Lincoln's
think
old
it's
shop in it?
on here. Hang on.
There it is, right there. Had it right
There it
there.
is, right there. That's the book.
Yeah, so let's get a look at here. This
This
is
one too.
this is
That was
actually
on there too? Okay, yep, they're both on there, right?
yeah, this is Lincoln's shop when he was in downtown Waldoboro. And some of the members of the Pine Tree Boating Club had some of their motors in this picture, but this is your same workbench or parts of it?
It's, yeah, parts of it.
Yep. So there you go, a little bit of trivia.
That and nostalgia, we can see that he has somewhat gone away from his workstation.
Yes. Well, that's, yeah, that, I don't think there's much of that left there, to be honest.
Cobwebs, we got cobwebs in here?
I think I turned a lot of the stuff the other way, so it's well beaten up and bleeding and greasy and whatever.
So this workbench is part of Lincoln's display in his Antique Outboard Museum. In probably our other videos, you've seen tours of the museum. Ever expanding. Always saying, I'm not starting another motor. And then he'll find a new one to pick away at. And they all have to shuffle up and make room.
Well, I think the interesting thing about this museum is the fact that you don't want to come in here thinking that you've got to be somewhere else, because you will be here for hours, because there's more to see here than anything that you could possibly do in an hour.
There's a
The
lot to
best
look.
story I have about, then when I was down at the old place, I had a museum too, but it was kind of spread out. It was back where I had the room, and there was a guy from California who was a member of the club, and he came out, he'd heard about it, he was inside and he was looking at stuff for about 2 hours when this woman came through the front door, and she was pissed. I mean, she
Hell-bent
was
for leather.
pissed. And it was his wife, and I'd never met her before, I knew nothing about her, but I said, this woman's gotta be connected to that guy who's out there looking at those outboards, and she was.
Now, there's a lot of history. It blew me away the first time I ever got into this place. I'm thinking, my God, we were, you know, thinking back, we were a very gifted country. Just to think how much it meant to have an outboard motor on your boat versus out there rowing that sucker, you
Yep.
know?
Yep.
And the inception of these outboards is just, it's just a credit to how what's the word? You guys.
Ingenious.
Ingenious.
Yeah.
Where they took the internal combustion engine.